quilty friends, it's Carolina Moore, your favorite sewing and quilting YouTuber, and today we're doing part 3 of our 3-part series on t-shirt quilts. Part 1 was prepping your t-shirts, adding interfacing, getting everything squared up. Part 2 was dealing with the t-shirts that just don't want to behave, and part 3 is today putting our t-shirts together to make our t-shirt quilt. I'm doing this all today on my Baby Lock Jubilant. This is the sewing machine that you see in most of my videos where I'm sewing. I love this machine. I think it's great for beginners. It takes you through many years of sewing. I've been sewing for over 30 years, and at least 90% of what I do, I could do on this Baby Lock Jubilant. And most of my videos are done on this Baby Lock Jubilant. Really, the biggest time that I want to head over to a bigger machine is for doing my own free motion quilting. But any piecing, this baby can handle all of it. So I'm excited to be working on the Baby Lock Jubilant today as we put this quilt together. So you ready? Let's get started. I have 34 of these blocks, and now I need to decide how these are all going to go together. So you could do this part at the very beginning and make that decision at the very beginning. I'm doing it at the end because that was just easier for me. Gonna get my iPad up. I like using a program called Procreate to do my drawing of quilting plans and things like that. You can use paper and pencil. Graph paper would be great. Okay, so this is Procreate. Oh, I just have an empty canvas on here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add the drawing guide, edit the drawing guide, and then increase that grid size to represent quilt blocks. All right, so I'm going to start on a new layer. And I know I have 34 blocks, so I'm going to write that down lest I forget. And now we can do some 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, that's 5 by 6. So this would be 30. If I do, come here. So if I do 30 blocks, it would look like this. And then I could do 4 on the back. The other option is to do 4 here. And then add a block right here. Or, I mean, it could be anywhere. I like putting things like this in the bottom corner. But add a block right here that would just be regular fabric. And that could have basically like a quilt label, but on the front, because this is a retirement quilt. So it would be the school that he taught at, and, you know, thanks for service, and the year that he got that, well, not the year that he got the quilt, because the quilt's a year late, but the year that was his last year of school, and then the staff of that would be the 22-23 school year that put these shirts together. So that would be fun to put on the front. And then I could put a traditional label on the back with my information, but my information doesn't need to be on the front. Or I could just have, you know, there really should be a label with the maker's information on it, because that's how you should do a quilt. It feels a little awkward for me sometimes because, I mean, I'm not doing this quilt to get credit for the quilt, but okay. So if I were to do this 5, and these are 9-inch blocks, 5 times 9 is going to be a 45 inches tall, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 times 9 is 63. So it's going to be 45 tall, or 45 wide by 63 tall. And I'll erase this. So that's what that, I like the proportions of the quilt, and that's why I like doing this on graph paper, so that I can really see what those proportions are going to look like. So I do like the proportions on this quilt. I think this will work. We're going to go with this. Okay, so now I can start laying out the blocks if I want. If you have a design wall, you can lay them on a design wall. I will need to cut a 9.5-inch square of some fabric to be able to put there, and I'll probably want to right on there. I think I'm probably going to use fabric paint right on there. Oh, no, I know what I'm going to do. I'll just use a regular piece of fabric, and then I will cut out vinyl and add vinyl. Or, look at this, thinking on the fly. That's what design is about. I'm going to make it like this, that it's going to be an iron-on transfer. And if I want, I could even use the back of one of the t-shirts that I have left over to be able to make it look like it really fits in the t-shirt quilt. So that's perfect. But we're going to start sewing everything. So I'll sew everything together except for that bottom row. So I'll leave this row right here separate, but we'll work on all of the rest of this together. And then I'll add that label off camera, and then quilt it and gift it. So yay for the last step with this t-shirt quilt. Okay, let me put this away now that I know my plan. It's going to be a 5x7. Okay. So what I'm doing now is I'm going to count out the colored versions versus the white, so I know roughly what my ratio is of white t-shirts to colored t-shirts. Okay, so I have 17 colored shirts and 17 white shirts, which means that I could totally do this as a checkerboard of white and colored shirts, which I think is fun. And I mean, a lot of these are gray. So what I'm going to do is kind of make that a little bit of an assortment in there so that the grays are kind of broken up a little bit by the other colors. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by sewing these into pairs, and I'll need 14 pairs, and then we'll go on to the next step. Now you can pin. If you've been around this channel for a while, you know that pinning is not my favorite, so I won't be pinning. And then I don't want to pull or push, I just want this to guide itself through. This is going to be a little thicker and bulkier than regular quilting cottons, but that's fine. So there's one. I'm going to keep going. I just need 7 of these, or no, 14 of these. God, I remember. Oh, and let me turn my iron back on and get the iPad away from the iron so that I don't put technology and heat that close to each other. So you just want to make sure that your top point and your bottom point are lining up, and they should. And I'm looking at my bobbin. And then also, I need to remember that I'm putting my darker colored one on the bottom and my lighter colored one on the top. Otherwise, I'm going to end up with an imperfect checkerboard. So just want to count as you go. And you absolutely can lay these all out on a design wall if you have a design wall. If you don't have a design wall, you can just use your floor, and you just put them all on the floor. Or if you have a big bed, wherever you have like a big space, you can just lay them out so you get an idea of where the color is traveling. You don't want to end up with a quilt where, let's say, like all the blue is in one corner, unless it's intended to be that way, where you're like doing a gradient of some kind, because you could do that too. But lay them out, and then when you have a layout, like once you have a layout, take a picture with your phone. Pretty much everyone at this point has a cell phone that has a camera in it, so just take a quick picture with your phone. Once you have a layout that you like, you want to take, or even just once you have a layout. So if you're going to lay out all your pieces on a design wall or the floor, doesn't matter. Once you have them all laid out, you will want to take a picture with your phone. Even if you're not convinced that this is the final version, taking a photo with your phone is super inexpensive. I mean, it costs fractions of pennies for the battery that it uses, and you can always delete the photos later, so it won't take any memory if you don't want it to. But just take a picture and then try out different layouts and then keep taking pictures so that you can refer back to them. Also, look at the pictures. Don't just take the pictures. Sometimes you'll see things in a picture that don't show up to your eye in real life. It's really strange. You'll look at the picture and you'll go, oh, it really is too, like, I've got too much dark over here. It feels heavy. It feels lopsided. Sometimes you get that more out of a photo than you do seeing it up close and in person, which is really strange. You would think that the in person would be the best, but the best is both. So do both. So yes, take pictures as you go. The pictures will also be your reference. So if you're like, oh, well, I think I like that one where it was laid out like this. Perfect. You have a reference photo to go back to, even if it was like 6 different layouts ago. And then you have that to reference when you're actually sewing all your pieces together to decide how it's going to go together. For this one, we love a finished quilt, so that's what we're doing. So I need to count in a second because of course I lost count, but although as long as I know I have 2 of each left, that's the 4 that I'll have remaining. No, that's not right. That is not right. So let me count, make sure I didn't sew too many. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, I just need 4 more. There we go. I was going to sew too many. That would not have been good. And then if your quilt isn't big enough, like you lay it out and it's not big enough, you want bigger, you can add borders. And there's all different kinds of ways that you can add borders. I mean, I guess I should start with, you can add sashing. So I'm putting these together right to one another, but I could put sashing in between them. That's really easy. I could add borders. That's really easy. And your sashing and borders can totally come from the cut up shirts if you want, especially if the shirts themselves are special. Sometimes we make t-shirt quilts out of the clothing of a loved one who's passed away. So when we do that, when we're making a shirt, or when we're using, I guess, precious shirts, you want to save every scrap. So you can cut those up. You'd want to put interfacing on the back again, because anytime you're sewing with your stretchy knits, you want to take out the stretch. But you can put interfacing on the back of those, cut them up, and make like a piano key border, use them as sashing, and just add more of the fabric back into the quilt so that you're using all that precious fabric. And I lost count again. 1 more. I'm doing good. Doesn't feel like it's adding up, but maybe it does. I'm sewing all this together on my fabulous Baby Lock Jubilant. Y'all, see that bit of thread right there? I totally won that bobbin chicken. That was exactly the end of my bobbin. Nice. I'm gonna pop in a new bobbin. Guess I'm using leftover bobbin bits. This will be interesting. 11, 12, 15, 14. Okay, so I'm going to take 2 of these and set them aside because these are going to be my bottom row. And then to these that are left, I'm going to sew a light or a dark, or I should say like a white or a colored piece to one side. So for example, this is white, so I can do a colored on this one. Or if I was going to do a white one, I would do it on this side. And so I'm going to be doing this with, it should be 6 of the rows. Yes, this makes sense. And you can see on various ones I added a little bit of extra interfacing because that interfacing didn't quite cover the area that I squared up, because you add the interfacing to the back and you square up on the front. So it doesn't always get lined up perfect, and that's fine. Let me do all the dark ones. And if you want to know about adding the interfacing to the back of these quilts, or these squares, the shirts, that's all in the first video in this series. So if you haven't seen the other videos in this series, the first one we talk about adding the interfacing and then some of the challenges that can come up when we make these t-shirt quilts. And then in video number 2, I go through some of just like the funky things that come up when you're squaring up these shirts, because they were designed as t-shirts. They weren't designed to be quilt blocks. We're just ingenious quilters who like to turn anything that sits still into a quilt, I suppose. Oh, I grabbed 2. Don't want to sew that together. That would be much too much. I can already feel this coming together. This is, for me, the fun part. There's the, like, taking fabric and cutting it apart, and that's fine. It's just not my favorite part. My favorite part is putting the fabric back together in my own design. And granted, okay, this is not a fancy design. It's, I mean, you can't really get much more simple than a checkerboard. So it's definitely not fancy, but it's fun. And it's building something. I like building things. I like the construction, the creation, I guess, of quilting. And the destruction, the cutting up of the fabric, has to happen for the creation to have its opportunity. But yeah. Okay, so now I'm going to cut these apart. And now I have 6 sets of 3 and 6 sets of 2. I'm going to put those together to make my rows of 5. And so these have been completely randomized. If you've laid yours out, you'll want to obviously sew them in the order that you want them in. Okay, so I have 3 of these that have a dark on each side, and then I'll have 3 that have a light on each side. So since this one has a dark on each side, I need to add the dark to this light to keep my checkerboard pattern. Now, if I screw this up, if I completely screw up my checkerboard pattern, it's just as easy as ripping a seam or 2 to fix it. So I'm not stressed about it. It's supposed to be a fun quilt. This one is also dark, 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 light. And if you missed the origin story of this quilt, this is for the dean of my kiddo's school who retired last year. At the end of last year, he retired. And on one of the last days of school, or the last week of school, a bunch of the teachers and staff, they had made these shirts and surprised him by wearing them. So he got to walk around campus all day and see people wearing these shirts with Bitmojis of him on them. So that was fun. And then they didn't really need shirts with his face on them afterwards. So afterwards they gave them all to a librarian, who then asked me if I could turn them into a quilt. And you can't say no to a librarian. I'm pretty sure there's a law about that in all 50 states, every territory, as well as Europe, Australia, and parts of Asia, right? You just don't say no to the librarian. Librarian asks you to do something, of course you're going to help her out. So, and I thought I'd make a great video on t-shirt quilts using a bunch of really fun t-shirts. So I get to make a video for you and a quilt for a former math teacher, which is why some of these are math related, turns middle school dean. So I guess that's the danger in the school knowing that you know how to quilt, is that you may be asked to make a t-shirt quilt for someone, or just a quilt for someone in general, like a signature quilt. Signature quilts are also great, or a memory quilt. Oh, no. For a second there I thought I lost Bob and Chicken on this one, and I didn't. All right, so these are my rows. And we're going to press these, and then we're going to sew these 6 rows together so that you can see most of the finished quilt. I'll add the other row later this weekend and quilt it up, but you'll get to see a fairly finished version of this quilt. Okay. So I'm going to set these 4 aside because that's my bottom row. I don't need my scissors. I do need my iron. And I actually want to move this whole thing over because in the first video I had the iron on top of this cutting mat and it actually warped the cutting mat a bit. So I was able to mostly get it back down to flat, but it's probably better to not do that. Okay, so I have my rows of 5 made, and this is a checkerboard. So a super easy trick with a checkerboard is, okay, this one has the dark in the middle, or I guess the dark's on the left, we'll press towards the left. If the light's on the left, we'll press towards the right. Something like that. You could just press, I mean, I guess that's probably easier. I will just go ahead and press every single one to the dark because these are big enough that it's not like a to go right straight across. And then I want to be a little careful again when pressing these because these shirts have that fusible on the front because that's how they were decorated. And there is a lot of bulk here. And normally I sew with Art Gallery Fabrics. Art Gallery Fabrics is all that I sew with. So there we go, pressing towards the darks. This interfacing, the iron is kind of sticking a little bit on the interfacing, which makes it less enjoyable to iron. Turn it down a little bit. Hopefully I paid attention and all of these are, the designs are right side up. That would be a really easy mistake to make, especially when I'm trying to chat with you and work on this step and think of the next step. Yeah. So I'll double check each row to make sure it doesn't need to be ripped. Just in case I wasn't paying attention and I put one of the shirts upside down. I mean, that's also a design choice, right? Something not working out the way that you thought it was going to gives you the opportunity for a design choice. Do I want to leave that shirt in upside down? Does it have meaning for it to be upside down? I think in this t-shirt quilt's case, there's no reason to leave a shirt upside down. Like if I personally knew more of the stories behind these shirts, like perhaps it was like a certain teacher's shirt that he wore. Like there was one teacher who was known for being able to walk on his hands, and it might be funny to have his shirt be upside down. But I wasn't on, I was a PTA, but I wasn't on staff. So I wouldn't be able to tell you if any of these shirts even belong to that teacher. Okay. I think we've got 3 done. So just 2 more, and then we get to do our long seams. And I think this will make a great lap size quilt, which depending on what the quilt is being used for, is good size. So lap size quilts I think are great for just general gifts to someone, because they can just like throw it over the couch, the back of the couch as like a decoration. They can fold it up and put it in a closet, and it doesn't take a ton of space in the closet, because you don't know, like someone might just want to take it out every now and then and look at it, but it doesn't really go with their decor. So a lap size quilt, it's not too big of a commitment for you, and it gives the owner lots of opportunities. But some people like to make t-shirt quilts for like a graduating high school senior, in which case you want to know, like if they're living in the dorms, they'll probably have a twin extra long or a full-size bed. So in that case, you might want to make a full-sized t-shirt quilt for them to be able to have on their bed in the dorms or in their first apartment if they're going off to live on their own for the first time, and you want this as a quilt for in their new home. But even then, a throw size is also great. You can take a throw size quilt to a football game to keep you warm. If you are in college and going to sporting events, you can take a throw size quilt out to the park and lay it out in the grass. And it's not too big or heavy to carry around. It is great in the trunk of the car. So, I don't know, I love throw size quilts. Okay, so I have your light on the end, your light on the end, your light on the end, which means that all these 3 should, yep, have a dark on the end. So now I can sew these rows into pairs of rows. So then I'll have 3 pairs of rows, and then I can sew those 3 pairs of rows together to make the quilt. Okay, now let me get myself back together here with the machine. Okay, so making sure that the top, I'm doing a top and bottom edge together and not flipping anything. And now you can sew 2 rows together and then add one more and then add one more and then add one more until you have them all added on. You absolutely can. Generally, that's not the way that I put quilts together because it gets really heavy to bring all that underneath the needle. And granted, all your bulk should always be on the left and your right should be fairly empty unless you're doing free motion quilting or applique. That's when you use the whole space. And I'm just nesting these seams so they look nice and pretty. So all your bulk is to the left, which makes it easier. You don't have to try to shove a bunch of bulk underneath here. Your seam allowance is to the right, your bulk is to the left. But if you keep adding a row and adding a row and adding a row, it gets really heavy. And so this keeps it from getting heavy until it has to. I'm just doing 2 rows together. And then 2 rows together. So that's the least amount of heavy that I can do. And then once I have all of them into sets of 2, then I'm turning a set of 2 into a set of 4, and then a set of 4 into a set of 6. So it just gives me 2 more heavy seams to try to sew. And why that's important and why you want to pay attention when you're sewing these rows together is the thing that moves the fabric underneath your needle is your feed dogs. Your feed dogs are those little zigzaggy guys underneath the presto foot. And they're doing their darndest by lifting up and then pulling the fabric backwards. So it's lifting up and pulling the fabric in that direction. And as it does that, like it only has so much power, I guess, to do that. And if you have a really heavy quilt, the feed dogs are not going to be able to do their job very well because it's trying to pull all that fabric. So you want to do what you can to support the fabric. So it just has to move the part that's under the needle. And you're not pulling or pushing under the needle. You're just supporting the rest of the fabric so that the feed dogs do the job. And the 2 biggest, I guess, enemies of this process are gravity and friction. So gravity, because gravity is a force and it is pulling all the fabric down. So that's why we're lifting it up. And then friction, which is your stuff like on the table, like dragging on the table. And that's also, we lift it up off the table and then we don't have those forces of gravity and friction fighting against our feed dogs. Now, I don't know if you've ever worked on like a bigger quilt top and then they get caught on the corners of your table. Then you're fighting a whole new level of gravity and friction as your quilt's getting stuck on corners or like on the edge of your table. So you want to keep the quilt up and out of the way of all those ridiculous gravity and friction forces. They're not ridiculous, it's science. Did you think that there would be that much science in quilting? I certainly did not. But I'm okay with it. It keeps it interesting. Okay. There we go. Now, if you want, you can pin these rows. I'm basically finger pinning, I guess, for the lack of a better term. When I get to a seam like I did there, then I grab the next seam and I make sure that the darks are going, the pressing is going towards the darks. I line it up and then I pinch it between my fingers. And then I take my fingers here and I make sure that the edge is lined up. And then I go. And then I just did that seam. So again, this time there's not a seam to line up, it's just a corner. And then we go. And I'm double checking my bobbin between these because I know I gave myself a partial bobbin lining these up. So I just have 3 more seams. And then this quilt will be mostly done. Done enough. This is actually a pretty fast quilt. But it's also a really simple quilt because it's just squares. There was the extra step of adding the interfacing to the back. So that does add time. And then I couldn't just cut regular squares. These were all basically fussy cut from the t-shirts. But this is a quilt that, I mean, if you're not filming video, and if you have all the shirts pre-prepped like I did with all those backs cut off, you could conceivably make a quilt like this in a day, at least the top, and then quilt it the following day. So a t-shirt quilt in a weekend is not unreasonable if you have the whole weekend to dedicate to quilting. Sorry, I had to double check my bobbin again. I'm so nervous about losing a bobbin chicken. Okay. So. Alright, now these should be able to go together fairly easily. I'm just going to move one out of the way. This one. Now this one is the one that has the t-shirt piece, so I really don't want it on the edge of the quilt. It's not going to be as impactful having that up at the top of the quilt. Having it in the middle is going to be better. Okay, let me line these up again. There we go. Okay. And these are a bit stiff because of that iron-on the front of all these shirts. So it makes it all a bit stiffer. Depending on the kinds of shirts that you're using, you may not have this much stiffness in your quilt. But those iron-ons are basically like solid sheets of vinyl that are fused to the front of the fabric. In most cases. Some of them are a little less solid, but some of them are really solid. You can see this one was cut out a little bit, so it's not quite as solid, but yeah. Okay. And I want to line these up best I can, but remember that it's a t-shirt quilt. The most important part of your t-shirt quilt is that it is made with love. Yeah, that you're making it for them. That's what matters. Okay, after this, just one more seam to have I'm looking at that bobbin. I might be able to make it again. Isn't that looking so fun? last seam. And I've got all of this quilt to handle as I'm working. So I'm really just focusing on from one seam to the next, so across the top of one set of blocks. And it's definitely pulling under the needle. So just go slow, adjust as needed. I'm definitely impatient that this is the last seam to get this quilt top done, but and while finish is better than perfect, I want to get pretty darn close to perfect on my way to finish. Again, adjusting all that bulk of the quilt around the machine so I don't have to worry about it, and adjusting everything as needed. And any imperfections, if you have a good long armor, you can ask them about being able to hide any of your imperfections in the quilting. I mean, a good long armor can't fix everything, but a good long armor can actually hide a lot of quilting issues. All right, you ready to see it all done? Here it is. Ooh. What a fun throw quilt this is. I love the way it turned out. I may end up adding an extra border to it just to give it a little bit of extra size because it's a little skimpy. We'll see. I think that'll look fun, adding a little bit of a border to it. And then I just need to add that bottom. Now the reason I didn't add, or I didn't sew those two bottom pieces together before, because I wasn't sure if I was going to end up with a white on this side or a dark. So I ended up with a dark because if there was a white on that end, it was going to impact how I put these together. Oh, actually I would have had to rip one apart. So I guess it's a good thing that I ended up with a white right there. Okay, so I'm going to be able to sew these two together to make my bottom row and leave one spot for that square. So I'm going to stitch these up, stitch these together to make that almost complete bottom row. I just need to figure out what I want on that front of the quilt label. There we go. There. So that'll be my bottom row. And look at that. The "You're the Best" will be right next to the label. Sometimes just letting things fall where they may means they end up exactly where they're supposed to be. Alright friends, that's it for today, and that's it for this 3-part series on making a t-shirt quilt. Let me know your comments down below. Make sure you're subscribed to this channel and give this video a thumbs up so that other people know you enjoy it and YouTube knows to share it with other people. Thanks so much for watching, my friends. I will see you right here real soon. Bye for now.